Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into the high-stakes world of corporate compliance. We're going to unpack exactly how global electronics giants are held accountable by the SASB standards, specifically within the resource transformation sector. I mean, just think about the sheer scale of these global electronics companies for a second. We're talking about millions of components and thousands of suppliers crossing dozens of international borders every single day. So, how are these massive entities actually kept in check? Well, if you've ever wondered how multinational corporations are forced to pull back the curtain on their own missteps, you are absolutely in the right place. We are going to break down the strict anatomy of an ethics audit.
So let's kick things off with the million-dollar question, the one that investors, stakeholders, and corporate compliance officers literally lose sleep over. What actually happens when global electronics manufacturers break the rules? We're dealing with massive entities that have incredibly complex global supply chains. And a lot of times, they're operating in regions where local laws might unfortunately just turn a blind eye to corruption or bribery. But when a rule is broken in these environments, it is not just a slap on the wrist. It sets off a highly regulated, mandatory chain reaction of reporting that can completely alter a company's financial standing.
Now, to really grasp this dynamic, we first need to look at how the SASB standard actually defines business ethics for this specific industry. Under this framework, business ethics isn't just some corporate buzzword, and it's definitely not just a nice poster in the break room about doing the right thing. It is strictly defined by the policies mitigating the risks of operating in regions with weaker laws. Investors don't just look at sales numbers anymore. They look at this quantifiable defense mechanism. It's a system that's specifically designed to prevent regulatory penalties, massive legal costs, and the kind of long-lasting reputational damage that can totally jeopardize a company's future revenue. Here is our compliance audit checklist for today. First up, the cost of unethical business. Second, preventative policies. Third, bribery losses. Fourth, anti-competitive losses. And finally, actions and accountability.
All right, Section 1, the cost of unethical business. You might be wondering, why dedicate an entire reporting section just to business ethics for equipment manufacturers? Well, the answer is written right into the standard itself. Unethical practices jeopardize future revenue growth and result in significant legal costs and a higher reputational risk. The vulnerability here really stems from the geographic reality of the industry. These companies manufacture, source, and sell all over the map. And when your operations span the globe, you inevitably touch regions with vastly weaker enforcement of business ethics laws. When that happens, the temptation and the systemic risk for corruption skyrockets. That massive geographic spread is exactly what creates the financial danger.
Moving right along to Section 2, preventative policies, specifically metric RTE 51A.1. This is where corporate legal counsel establishes their defensive line long before any laws are actually broken. Imagine logging into a multinational company's internal compliance dashboard. Under this first metric, companies have to publicly disclose their specific employee awareness programs and, crucially, their internal reporting mechanisms. Think highly secure, interactive, and anonymous whistleblower portals. They also must detail their anti-corruption policies and, perhaps most importantly, how they conduct thorough due diligence on their entire value chain. That means vetting the ethics of suppliers, contractors, and joint partners. They basically have to prove, on paper, that they are actively working to prevent corruption and anti-competitive behavior from the ground up. What's truly fascinating about the SASB standards formatting is how these requirements just sit right side by side. Metric 510A.1, which is a qualitative discussion of those preventative policies we just talked about, sits right next to the quantitative financial metrics. It's a mandatory 1-2 punch built directly into the reporting structure. First, you have to tell investors and regulators how you try to stop malpractice, and then, right below it, you have to tell them exactly how much it cost you when those defenses inevitably failed. Which brings us to Section 3, bribery and corruption losses, under metric RTE 510A.2. When defenses fail, we transition directly to consequences. And for bribery and corruption, the standard demands cold, hard numbers. Companies must disclose the total amount of monetary losses incurred from active legal proceedings. This includes civil judgments, regulatory penalties, disgorgement, and criminal fines. But here is the absolutely crucial point that investors zero in on. This number specifically excludes the money the company spent on legal defense. Why? Because regulators and investors want to see the pure financial penalty paid out to the opposing party or the government, completely unmasked by exorbitant lawyer fees. They want to gauge the true severity of the offense. Before we move on, it's vital to understand that SASB deliberately splits these financial penalties into two very distinct categories for these manufacturers. Metric 2 is strictly for illicit payoffs, things like bribery and corruption of foreign officials. Metric 3, on the other hand, is entirely dedicated to a different kind of corporate strategy: market manipulation. Let's explore that right now in Section 4, Anti-Competitive Behavior Losses, Metric RTE 510A.3. This covers the fallout from unlawfully dominating a market. And anti-competitive behavior covers a huge range of corporate sins. We aren't just talking about backroom price fixing. If an electronics giant abuses patent laws to artificially squash a smaller rival, or leverages massive network effects to bundle services and lock out the competition, it triggers this metric. Imagine a major hardware manufacturer forcing suppliers into predatory exclusivity contracts that violate antitrust laws. When corporate legal counsel eventually has to settle those antitrust lawsuits, the monetary losses must be reported here, utilizing the exact same rigorous standard: total monetary losses, completely excluding defense fees.
Now, a company's legal counsel can't just drop a massive, vague dollar amount into an annual financial statement to hide a scandal. No way. They are required to provide deep, structural context. They have to publicly report the nature of the proceeding. Was it a quiet, out-of-court settlement, a guilty plea, or a full public judgment after a trial? They must clearly outline the context. Was the core issue bribing a local official to secure a factory permit, or was it price-fixing essential electronic components? And finally, they must comprehensively detail their corrective actions.
This perfectly tees up Section 5, Actions and Accountability. That requirement for corrective actions brings us to the resolution phase. The standard dictates this very clearly. The entity shall describe any corrective actions implemented in response to the legal proceedings. Simply paying a massive fine and writing it off as a cost of doing business just isn't tolerated by this framework. The company must publicly detail the concrete changes they're making. Have they fired the management team responsible, terminated corrupt joint partners in overseas manufacturing? Are they completely overhauling their operational training? They have to put their structural reforms on the public record for investors to scrutinize.
When you take a step back, you're actually looking at the entire life cycle of an ethics violation under this framework. It moves linearly from the initial unethical practice directly through to legal proceeding and resulting monetary loss, right into mandatory public reporting of the nature and context, and finally culminating in verifiable correction. It's a closed-loop system designed to force transparency from the initial breach all the way through to verifiable structural reform within the company. Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. These strict reporting standards absolutely force the truth and the staggering financial consequences into the light. But it forces us to ask, is transparent reporting alone truly enough to eradicate malpractice in massive, globe-spanning supply chains? Or is it simply creating a much more detailed map of exactly where the bodies are buried? Think about that for a bit. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Hopefully you now have a powerful new lens through which to view corporate compliance and the real cost of doing business.